A teenager sitting in his bedroom with nothing but a laptop, suddenly outsmarting billion-dollar companies, stealing millions of dollars, and even taking control of Twitter accounts belonging to Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and Barack Obama. This is not a movie. This is real. This is the story of the kids who hacked the digital world. And before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Zimo Voice, where we bring you the most shocking stories hidden in the shadows of the internet. It all begins in Tampa, Florida. A 13-year-old boy sits in his small bedroom, his eyes glued to the glowing screen of his computer. His name, Graham Ivan Clark. On the outside, Graham looks like any other teenager. He's homeschooled, he doesn't have many friends, and he spends most of his time online. But behind that computer screen, Graham is starting to build a very different identity, one that will eventually make him millions and draw the attention of the FBI, the Secret Service, and some of the most powerful companies in the world. For Graham, the game of choice was Minecraft, but it wasn't just about building castles or fighting monsters. It was about bending the rules, finding loopholes, pushing boundaries, and making money in ways most kids his age couldn't even imagine. On YouTube, Graham goes by the name Open, a self-styled hustler who brags about being homeschooled and about his lonely life. Minecraft becomes his escape, his universe, his stage. But he quickly discovers that playing the game isn't enough. There's an entire underground economy around it. Rare skins, flashy usernames, exclusive accounts. Some players are willing to spend hundreds, even thousands, to stand out. And Graham? He sees opportunity. By 14 years old, Graham is scamming his way through this underground marketplace. He promises rare Minecraft skins and premium usernames. But here's the catch. He never delivers. The money comes in. The items never go out. To Graham, it feels like easy money. By 2017, he's reportedly pulling in $5,000 a month, an outrageous sum for a kid who can't even drive yet. But that's the thing about scams. Once you get away with them, once you taste that rush, the temptation grows. Minecraft isn't enough anymore. Graham wants more. And so begins his descent, from a video game hustler to one of the most infamous teenage cybercriminals of his generation. By the time Graham turned 15, the walls of his small Tampa bedroom were no longer just walls. They were the boundaries of his empire. While other kids were worrying about grades, sports, or hanging out at the mall, Graham was perfecting the art of deception. Minecraft had given him a taste of what money and power online could feel like. But soon, he realized there were bigger fish to fry than gamers desperate for rare skins. That's when he discovered the underground world of Ogasource. Ogasource wasn't just a forum. It was a marketplace of ambition, greed, and shadowy deals. A community where digital hustlers, hackers, and wannabe kingpins exchanged tips, tricks, and stolen goods. The name stood for Original Gangster, usernames, rare, short handles on platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Names like at L or at Dark. Handles so simple, so rare, they carried prestige like a badge of honor. For Graham, this world was intoxicating. It was louder, riskier, and far more rewarding than Minecraft scams. Here, he wasn't just a lonely kid with too much free time. He was a player, and he wasted no time building his reputation. Under the alias Open, Graham made contact with buyers and sellers, learning the ins and outs of account hijacking. It wasn't long before he graduated from scamming in-game items to pulling off SIM swaps. A SIM swap was a clever trick, and a devastating one. It worked like this. You convince a mobile carrier employee to transfer someone else's phone number onto your SIM card. With that one move, you hijack their texts, their calls, and most importantly, their two-factor authentication codes. Suddenly, you had the keys to their email, their social media, even their cryptocurrency wallets. For Graham, SIM swapping was like discovering a cheat code for real life. The money wasn't measured in hundreds anymore, it was thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes more. And Graham was addicted. By late 2018, whispers of his scams reached beyond the forums. He was no longer just a kid hustling Minecraft players. He was a rising name in the cyber underworld, a teenager who had mastered the art of social engineering, who could charm or pressure his way into stealing what others worked their whole lives for. But the bigger the score, the bigger the spotlight. And for someone like Graham, That spotlight was dangerous, because while he was making money, law enforcement was watching, and every new scam brought him one step closer to crossing a line he could never come back from. They kept pushing. Graham's appetite for bigger scores had hardened into ambition. The small victories, the stolen Minecraft skins, the sold-off usernames, the quick payouts from Ogasers no longer satisfied him. He wanted a headline. He wanted a score so big it would rewrite what people believed possible. When the idea of targeting Twitter first surfaced in a private chat room, it sounded like madness. Twitter wasn't a game server with sloppy security. It was a platform that ran the public square of the internet. It was a place where presidents, tech founders, celebrities, and brands spoke to millions. To touch Twitter was to touch the world itself. That audacity is what made the plan irresistible. They didn't imagine a cinematic break-in. No zero-day exploit, no blockbuster virus. What they planned was old-fashioned social engineering turned extreme. Persuasion, pretense, and pressure aimed at the humans who managed Twitter systems. It was a reminder that the easiest door to open in any secure building is the one held open by another person. They studied Twitter employees like players study game mechanics. Job titles, support workflows, internal tool names, the lingo people use on calls. Every tiny detail they could find was ammunition. They practiced scripts, rehearsed identities, and mapped internal processes. If you could convince the right staff member that you were a co-worker in need, you could be led, step by step, to access that cozy, terrifying core, admin controls. The plan unfolded in phases. First, reconnaissance. They gathered every scrap of open-source information about Twitter's help desk and its tools. They read forums and career pages. They found the onboarding paperwork and pieced together how employees authenticated themselves for remote support. They learned what a typical escalation looked like. They watched for opportunities. People who might be overworked, new hires who might be lax, an outsourced contractor with limited training. Second, recruitment and division of labor. No one person could pull the whole thing off alone. The job required a dozen small, coordinated moves. Someone would be the voice, smooth, confident, in control on the phone. Someone else would be the techie, ready to seize the session cookie or copy a screenshot. Others monitored public Twitter accounts, watched for the exact moment to strike, and prepared the phrasing of the scam tweet that would appear under the blue check marks of verified accounts. Third, the execution. It was brutal in its simplicity. They called help desks and chat lines impersonating colleagues, managers, or legitimate security team members. They created phony work tickets and used carefully invented backstories to verify their identity. On the phone, they were professional, calm, authoritative, the voice of someone whose words carry access. When they got a foothold, they pushed a tweet here, an email change there. They coaxed and pressured and took advantage of human fatigue. Eventually, an account would be handed off to an internal admin tool. The interface they saw was not a glamorous black box. It was an internal web page with buttons and fields, the kind of management panel that instantly looked a little too familiar to anyone who has ever been given the keys to a system. They found controls that could change an account's email address, reset phone-based two-factor authentication, even post as the account. That control was power. For them, it was opportunity. On the day they chose, they hit the motherlode. They targeted a curated list of high-profile accounts, the people and organizations whose tweets were guaranteed to ripple around the earth. CEOs with millions of followers, politicians, entertainers, and established charities. In a single coordinated wave, dozens of these verified accounts sent the same message, almost verbatim. Hey everyone, I'm giving back. I just transferred XBTC to this address. Send $1,000 in the next 30 minutes, and you'll get back $2,000. The message was engineered to spread. It contained a Bitcoin wallet address, a countdown, and the kind of urgency that overrides reason. Within minutes, replies exploded. FOMO, fear of missing out, and the siren call of instant profit spread through timelines. The scammers watched as small sums flowed into the wallets. Screenshots poured across private chats. The plan was working. For the digital world, it was chaos. Verified accounts were posting nonsense. Verified influencers were, for a time, endorsing a fraud. Investors and everyday users who trusted the blue checkmark clicked, scrolled, and, in some cases, sent money. In the early minutes, it looked like a shocking feat of technical wizardry. The easy conclusion was that someone had written a masterful exploit. The less glamorous truth was more disturbing. A group of teenagers had exploited human trust at scale and used it to amplify a simple Bitcoin scam into a global event. Almost immediately, Twitter suspended many accounts and tried to mitigate the damage. The company scrambled a response. Engineers and security staff plunged into emergency mode, trying to undo changes and contain access. Messages were deleted, passwords reset, and sessions revoked. But the damage, the headlines, the trust broken, the funds already moved, had already been done. For Graham and his co-conspirators, the initial thrill was intoxicating. The scale of the stunt meant publicity, the sort of infamy that a 15 or 16-year-old rarely achieves. They reveled in the chaos they created. In chat rooms and encrypted messages, they high-fived. In tiny, private victories, they celebrated being the ghost behind the blue checks. They had punched the heart of the internet, and the ripples were visible everywhere. Then the other ripple began to roll back in the opposite direction, law enforcement. Because this wasn't small-time fraud anymore. The incident involved public figures. It crossed national borders, and it exposed systemic vulnerabilities. It attracted the attention of federal agencies, cybercrime units, the Secret Service, the FBI. Those agencies had resources long beyond anything the kids had handled. Cross-jurisdictional investigation teams, legal instruments, and the power to demand cooperation from ISPs, phone companies, and platform operators. What made the investigation tractable, in the way that intelligence and detective work often is, were the small, human mistakes the perpetrators had made. A reused username across forums, a throwaway post that connected an alias to a personal account, a single SIM swap that left a trail to a phone number tied to a real-world identity. The same human errors that allowed them to break and were the breadcrumbs that allowed investigators to follow. The process of unmasking took time and patience. Federal agents pieced together logs, subpoenaed records, and followed cryptocurrency flows. Analysts cross-referenced timestamps, IP logs, and social posts. They relied on solidity more than showmanship. Small, repeatable, verifiable facts that pointed to the same collection of individuals again and again. It wasn't a cinematic raid. It was a long, methodical drain of a pond, emptying the hiding places one by one. For Graham, the fall came faster than he anticipated. Arrests happened in waves. Colleagues disappeared from forums. Chat rooms went silent. Friends were questioned by police. In some cases, the people who had been at the center of the operation took plea deals. Others fought in court. The legal machinery, once set into motion, was relentless. The criminal case was not just about the quick Bitcoin funds or a few minutes of viral chaos. Prosecutors painted a broader picture, a pattern of deceit that stretched back years, from Minecraft scams to account takeovers, to SIM swaps that let them drain accounts and steal digital property. The charges accumulated: fraud, conspiracy, unauthorized access, wire fraud, and in some jurisdictions, counts tied to the theft of property or identity theft. For the government, the criminality was not merely prankish mischief. It was a coordinated enterprise that caused real harm. Sentences varied. Some participants were juveniles. Some were older. Some cooperated with investigators and received reduced penalties. Graham, young and still defining himself, faced a particularly fraught reckoning. The court of public opinion and the court of law both sizing up a life that had rapidly spun out of control. In the aftermath, the scandal produced intense public debate. Tech writers and security experts argued over the root causes. Was Twitter's internal tooling too lax? Had companies outsourced critical functions without adequate security? Were phone carriers too willing to hand over numbers? Policy wonks debated regulation, while journalists hammered on the societal angle. What does it mean when a teenager can, with a few well-crafted lies, commandeer the voice of the very institutions that shape public discourse? At the same time, the victims of the scam had stories of their own. Ordinary people who sent Bitcoin expecting a double return found that their funds were gone, that the promise had been an illusion. For celebrities and businesses whose accounts had been hijacked, there was reputational damage and embarrassment. For Twitter, it was a crisis moment. The company had to reckon publicly with failure to protect the accounts that anchor conversations across the planet. The legal consequences rippled out. Governments used the incident to demand tighter controls. Platforms like Twitter re-examined internal policies, passwordless access, employee training, and the way administrative tools could be abused. Phone companies faced scrutiny for the ease with which numbers could be ported, and the broader security community saw the case as a galvanizing example. Technical defenses are necessary, but human factors are equally critical. For Graham, the journey didn't end with arrest. In courtrooms and detention halls, he was forced to confront the human cost of his choices. The people whose accounts were betrayed, the families affected by reputational harm, the young lives derailed by criminal convictions. He had started as a kid who exploited a game economy and graduated into a figure who symbolized the intersection of youth, technology, and danger. Years after the headlines faded, the lessons remained. On one side were pragmatic fixes, better gating of administrative tools, stricter controls on number porting, multi-factor authentication systems that didn't rely on SMS, and more robust internal monitoring. On the other side were the deeper cultural questions. How does a generation raised inside screens learn boundaries? How does society channel curiosity and technical talent without letting it tip into criminality? The young men who had once celebrated stolen skins and prototype consoles found themselves split along different futures. Some went to prison, some to probation, some into quiet obscurity, and a few tried to rebuild careers in cybersecurity, the very field their actions had helped make richer. A handful offered public apologies. Others remained defiant, claiming that their youthful hubris had been a kind of experiment. Whatever their statements, the consequences had reshaped them irreversibly. The network they had exploited and the culture that allowed such an exploit to grow did not vanish. Platforms hardened, regulations tightened, and the marketplace shifted. But the incentive structures remained. Fame, fast money, and the thrill of being untouchable continue to lure the curious to explore the edge between legitimate innovation and criminal enterprise. When the dust finally settled, the Twitter hack of that summer remained a parable. It was a story about the fragility of trust in systems built for humans, the power of social engineering, and the way that youthful ambition can collide spectacularly with legal consequence. It was also a cautionary tale for technology companies, regulators, and parents alike. In a world where the next great exploit can be conceived in a bedroom and executed from half a continent away, vigilance must be constant and empathy must guide reform. Courtrooms became the stage where the once anonymous hackers were dragged into the light. For years, they had operated behind usernames, cloaked in the illusion of invincibility that the internet gives teenagers who believe themselves smarter than the world. But in a federal courthouse, the aliases melted away. Super Day was Dylan Wheeler. Kuro was Graham Ivan Clark. Sonic was Sonad and What. Each name carried its own baggage, its own mythology in the underground. Now those myths were reduced to government exhibits, case numbers, and sworn testimony. The prosecution painted their story with stark, unforgiving strokes. Exhibits flashed across monitors, Discord logs, Telegram chats, screenshots of admin panels. Juries and judges who barely understood Minecraft or Twitter were walked through timelines of scams, showing how quickly small thefts snowballed into multi-million-dollar fraud. The prosecutors leaned on a simple narrative. These weren't harmless pranks. These were calculated crimes. For Graham, barely 17 at the time of the Twitter hack, the image was complicated. On one hand, he was a child, impulsive, reckless, and craving recognition. On the other, he had orchestrated one of the most high-profile cybercrimes of the decade, using his wits to penetrate a Fortune 500 company. The court wrestled with both sides of that coin. Was he a misguided kid, or was he a criminal mastermind in training? His defense team tried to humanize him. They brought in teachers who remembered his intelligence, his restless curiosity, his ability to solve problems in minutes that baffled others for hours. They described him as a boy addicted not to drugs, but to the thrill of breaking systems. His defense leaned heavily on youth, painting his actions as a tragic misdirection of genius rather than irredeemable malice. Meanwhile, investigators testified about the painstaking trail they had followed. One FBI agent described the digital breadcrumbs, Bitcoin wallet transactions, login timestamps, IP addresses that stitched aliases to real names. Another revealed how a SIM swap used to hijack a victim's number had been traced back to a prepaid phone purchased with a debit card under Graham's real name. A single careless slip had unraveled a carefully spun web. The trial transcripts read like two narratives in collision. On one side, the myth of the untouchable hacker, the kid who outsmarted billion-dollar corporations and for a moment controlled the megaphone of the world. On the other, the cold, bureaucratic march of evidence, showing that every click, every login, every boast in the chat room left traces that could, and eventually would, be used against them. But Graham was not alone. Other members of the underground faced their own reckonings. Some cut deals, offering testimony in exchange for lighter sentences. Others refused, insisting they had done nothing more than bend the rules. The courtroom dramas unfolded like fractured mirrors, each defendant reflecting a slightly different consequence of the same obsession. For the victims, individuals who had lost money in the Bitcoin scam, companies embarrassed by the exposure of their weak defenses, the trial provided closure, but not satisfaction. Some testified about the betrayal they felt seeing trusted accounts weaponized against them. Others spoke of savings drained, investments lost, reputations tarnished. For them, the sentences were numbers. The pain lingered long after the verdicts. And yet, beyond the trials, the story began to take on a different shape. Cybersecurity experts dissected the hack in conferences, pointing out how simple social engineering had undone layers of technical defense. Lawmakers called hearings, demanding accountability from tech giants. Twitter executives were grilled about why admin tools were so powerful and why safeguards had failed. Telecom companies faced pressure to end the weak practices that made SIM swapping so easy. The underground took notes, too. Forums buzzed with chatter. Some mocked the arrested hackers for being sloppy. Others swore to change their own methods, to use stricter OPSEC, better encryption, no reuse of handles or wallets. The arrest didn't kill the culture. They evolved it. New scams emerged. New names rose to prominence. But the shadow of the Twitter hack lingered like a warning ghost. A reminder that the internet never forgets, and that law enforcement is slower than rumor, but just as persistent. Still, even as reforms rolled out and cases closed, the bigger question lingered. What happens to kids like Graham after the fall? Some hackers vanish into obscurity, their names fading from forums and headlines. Others pivot, some toward crime, others toward redemption. A few even find careers in legitimate cybersecurity. Their past both a stain and a strange credential. For Graham, and for many like him, the story didn't end with a gavel strike. It was only another beginning, haunted by choices made in the reckless pursuit of notoriety. Prison is a strange place for hackers. Unlike drug traffickers, gang members, or violent offenders, these young men were locked up for crimes committed not with fists or guns, but with keyboards. Yet, the punishment was no less real. For some, like David, the experience became a turning point. Inside, he started to cooperate with investigators. He explained, step by step, how the scams were pulled off, how the systems of billion-dollar corporations were circumvented with little more than charm and persistence. His knowledge impressed even the seasoned cybercrime experts who cross-examined him. They saw not just a criminal, but a young man whose skills, if redirected, could be invaluable. When David was released after serving 18 months, he didn't waste time. He went back to school, studied cybersecurity, and eventually found legitimate work helping companies defend themselves against the very types of attacks he once carried out. For him, redemption was possible, but not everyone had the same ending. Sonad, for instance, struggled after his release. The terms of his probation were suffocating. His officer banned him from using a computer, the very thing that had once defined his identity. He was harassed, restricted, and constantly reminded of his past mistakes. Without purpose and without freedom, he slipped into depression. Drugs followed, and soon violations of probation stacked against him. The system saw him not as a genius fallen astray, but as a repeat offender. In 2019, he was dragged back before a judge and sentenced to another 9 months behind bars. Nathan, the youngest of the group, had perhaps the most tragic arc, gentle by nature and less involved in the scams than the others. Prison terrified him. Out on bail, he panicked about the thought of confinement. One day, he cut off his ankle monitor and tried to flee to Canada. But at the border, he was caught. In desperation, he injured himself, collapsing before he could escape. He survived, but was forced to serve 2 years in prison. Later, he would come out as transgender, becoming Holly, and starting a new life. But the scars of those years, both physical and emotional, never truly faded. And then there was Dylan. Impulsive, reckless Dylan. Unlike the others, he refused to plead guilty. He fought the charges, insisting he was being pinned for crimes he didn't commit. When ordered to surrender his passport, he fled instead, using his dual citizenship to move to the Czech Republic. His escape dragged his mother into the crosshairs. She was sentenced for aiding him, even as Dylan claimed she had done nothing. For years, he resurfaced sporadically, giving talks on cybersecurity, even running his own firm. But by 2020, Dylan vanished again. His company shut down. His name disappeared. To this day, no one really knows where he is. As for Graham, the Minecraft scammer who had started it all, his story became infamous. The Twitter hack of 2020 would forever link his name to one of the boldest cybercrimes of the digital age. Arrested at just 17, he was sentenced as a juvenile, serving time until 21. The internet still debates his fate. Some call him a mastermind, others a cautionary tale of wasted genius. Each of their lives became a case study in consequence. Some redeemed themselves, proving that raw talent could be redirected toward good. Others crumbled under the weight of their past, unable to escape the shadow of mistakes made when they were too young to understand their full gravity. But the one truth that united them all was this: the game they thought they controlled had always been bigger than them. The underground was unforgiving. The corporations they toyed with were relentless. And the government, though slow, never forgot the kids who hacked Xbox, the Minecraft scammer who stole millions, the teenagers who hijacked Twitter. They were all part of a generation that discovered the terrifying power of the internet, long before they understood the consequences of wielding it. The dust from the trials eventually settled, but the ripples never stopped. Every headline, every court case, every leak of transcripts echoed far beyond the walls of those courtrooms. For Microsoft, Twitter, Epic Games, and every other company caught in the crossfire, the message was undeniable. Teenagers had found the cracks in their billion-dollar armor. It wasn't about brute force hacking or elite technical wizardry. Most of the breaches had been pulled off with something far simpler: social engineering, convincing a customer service rep to reset a password, tricking an employee into giving up access, exploiting human trust. The hacks exposed how fragile even the biggest corporations really were, and it forced them to change. Telecom companies rolled out new layers of SIM swap protection. Twitter restructured its internal tools, limiting the godlike power once given to low-level employees. Even the FBI used the cases in training seminars, teaching agents how to recognize online criminal ecosystems that had once seemed invisible. But while companies scrambled to fix their defenses, the underground evolved too. On forums like Ogasur's and Successors, new waves of teenagers studied the downfall of Graham, Dylan, and the rest. They dissected what went wrong, almost like students poring over a failed battle plan. Some mocked them for getting caught. Others learned from their mistakes, promising themselves they would never leave the same breadcrumbs, never reuse the same aliases, never let ego trip them into carelessness. A darker lesson emerged too. Crime could be profitable if you got out before the hammer came down. For every hacker arrested, another 3 were stepping in to fill the void. Cryptocurrency thefts continued to rise. Account hijackings became more sophisticated. Scams mutated, from SIM swaps to NFT rug pulls, from hijacking usernames to draining wallets. And yet, the story of the kids who hacked Xbox, the Minecraft scammer, and the Twitter hijackers became a legend told in hushed tones across the internet. For some, it was a cautionary tale. For others, it was an inspiration. Graham Ivan Clark, in particular, became a symbol of that blurred line between genius and recklessness. Here was a boy, not yet old enough to buy alcohol, who had briefly controlled the global megaphone of Twitter. He had access to accounts belonging to Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Barack Obama, even major corporations. In a single afternoon, he had shaken public trust in social media itself. For cybersecurity experts, the case became a warning shot. If kids could do this, what about nation-states? What about organized crime? If a bedroom hacker could bring Twitter to its knees, what could a well-funded, coordinated group achieve? Governments began to look at cybercrime not as mischief, but as warfare. Budgets for cybersecurity swelled. Laws toughened. Task forces expanded. And still, somewhere in the corners of the internet, young hackers whispered about Graham, Dylan, Nathan, and Sonad. They had become part myth, part morality play, living proof of both the allure and the cost of chasing power in the digital shadows. Some of their names faded with time. Some resurfaced, either in redemption stories or in new arrests. And others, like Dylan, vanished entirely. His fate still a mystery, but their story refused to die. Because at its core, it wasn't just about stolen Xbox prototypes, Minecraft scams, or even hijacked Twitter accounts. It was about something bigger. A generation growing up online, discovering just how much power the internet had given them, before the world was ready to deal with it. On July 15th, 2020, the internet held its breath. What started as just another summer afternoon suddenly transformed into one of the most surreal days in social media history. It began quietly, almost invisibly, with internal chatter inside Twitter. A few employees noticed strange activity in their admin tools, but it didn't set off alarms right away. After all, these tools were supposed to be used for customer support, to reset passwords, verify accounts, or handle escalated complaints. But behind the scenes, the tools had been hijacked. Through a mix of social engineering and SIM swapping, the hackers managed to gain access to Twitter's most powerful back-end system. With it, they could do something that almost no one outside the company had ever seen. They could take control of any account they wanted, and they didn't waste time. At first, the world noticed odd tweets from cryptocurrency accounts. Then, things escalated. Elon Musk's Twitter account lit up with a bizarre promise. I am doubling all Bitcoin payments sent to this address. If you send me $1,000, I will send back $2,000. It was the kind of scam most people were used to seeing in shady corners of the internet. But this wasn't a random fake account. This was Elon Musk's verified profile with millions of followers. Before people could even wrap their heads around it, Bill Gates' account posted the same thing. Then Jeff Bezos. Then Apple. Then Barack Obama. Then Joe Biden. It was a blitzkrieg of blue-check authority, all parroting the same crypto scheme. And the internet went into meltdown. For everyday users, it was terrifying. If the accounts of some of the most powerful people in the world weren't safe, what about theirs? For Twitter, it was a nightmare. The hack wasn't just embarrassing. It was existential. This was a platform trusted by world leaders, CEOs, and journalists. And now, it looked like a playground for teenage scammers. Behind the chaos was a 17-year-old from Florida, Graham Ivan Clark. Using connections from the Xbox underground and the Minecraft scamming circles, he had pieced together a network of access points, middlemen, and accomplices. With a combination of persuasion, trickery, and boldness, he convinced Twitter employees to hand over access to one of the most sensitive systems in Silicon Valley. The hack lasted just a few hours, but in that short time, more than $100,000 worth of Bitcoin flowed into the wallets controlled by the scammers. And yet, the money wasn't the most important part. The real impact was a shockwave of fear. What if the hackers had used those accounts not for a Bitcoin scam, but for something far worse? What if they had triggered panic on Wall Street by tweeting fake statements from Jeff Bezos or Apple? What if they had impersonated political leaders during an international crisis? The potential consequences were staggering. As the Bitcoin wallet filled, the FBI, Secret Service, and cybersecurity experts around the world scrambled. Within hours, they were tracking the addresses, combing through Discord servers, and following the breadcrumbs. And then came the knock at Graham's door. Early morning in Tampa, Florida, a SWAT team surrounded his house. His neighbors watched as a teenager, barely old enough to vote, was let out in handcuffs. In his bedroom, agents found evidence of his schemes. computers, SIM cards, stolen credentials, and notes scribbled with Bitcoin addresses. The internet had a new face for its most infamous hack, the boy who owned Twitter for a day. But Graham wasn't alone. Other names began to surface. Young hackers in the UK and the US linked through online forums, chat rooms, and shared obsessions with clout, scams, and money. Some had been part of earlier mischief in Minecraft servers or Xbox hacking. Others had drifted in from Discord groups where identity theft and SIM swapping were traded like baseball cards. For the public, it was astonishing. For investigators, it was déjà vu. Once again, it wasn't shadowy figures in hoodies backed by foreign governments. It was teenagers, kids who had grown up in a digital world that gave them more power than they ever should have had. The world couldn't stop talking about it. For days after July 15, 2020, the headlines were everywhere. Twitter hacked, Bitcoin scam hits world leaders' accounts, teenager behind global cyber attack. Every news channel, from CNN to BBC, treated it like an act of digital terrorism. Inside Twitter headquarters, panic turned into shame. The platform had been exposed, not by a state-backed army of hackers, but by a group of teenagers who used a mix of charm, trickery, and audacity. The company had no choice but to admit that its internal tools were far too powerful and far too vulnerable. In the weeks that followed, Twitter rolled out sweeping changes. Internal access was locked down. Employees who once had godlike privileges suddenly found their tools heavily restricted. Whole departments were reshuffled, and new cybersecurity teams were created almost overnight. The company knew one thing for certain. If it ever happened again, Twitter might not survive the damage to its credibility. But for the hackers, the fallout was much harsher. In Florida, prosecutors moved quickly against Graham Ivan Clark. Despite being just 17 years old at the time of the hack, he was charged as an adult. His face was plastered across newspapers and TV screens. To some, he was a genius who had humiliated Silicon Valley. To others, he was a criminal mastermind who had endangered the security of millions. The prosecutors didn't hold back. They accused him of fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized computer access on a massive scale. They painted a picture of a reckless teenager who wasn't just in it for Bitcoin, but for ego, someone who wanted to show the world he could bend it to his will. Clark eventually agreed to a plea deal. He was sentenced to 3 years in a juvenile facility, followed by probation. The sentence was both a punishment and a warning. It told the hacker underground, you might get rich, you might get famous, but if you get caught, the system will come down on you hard. But the other kids involved didn't escape either. 2 accomplices, one in the UK and another in the US, were also arrested. They had helped with parts of the hack, routing money or handling stolen credentials. Their trials became public spectacles, drawing attention to the strange, almost absurd reality of the situation. Teenagers in bedrooms had pulled off one of the biggest cyber heists in history. The hacker community was shaken. On forums where teenagers once bragged about their scams, paranoia spread. Who could you trust? Who was an informant? Who might cut a deal with the FBI to save themselves? Ogasource, the forum that had birthed many of these connections, became toxic with suspicion. Some users vanished. Others doubled down, hiding deeper in encrypted channels, try and make their operations more secretive. And yet, for all the arrests, for all the fear, the legend of the hack only grew. Graham Ivan Clark became a name whispered in the same breath as Kevin Mitnick or Gary McKinnon, hackers who had once embarrassed governments and corporations alike. His story became a case study in both cybercrime and cyber defense. Universities dissected it. Cybersecurity conferences featured it. Even the FBI used it as a training example. But perhaps the strangest part of all was what it revealed about the fragility of modern life. In just a few hours, a teenager had proven that trust in digital platforms, trust in communication, finance, and even politics could be shattered. The world realized that the future wasn't just vulnerable to foreign enemies or organized crime. It was vulnerable to kids with laptops and too much time. The question that lingered wasn't whether Graham's chapter was over. It was, who will be next? The Twitter hack may have been stopped. The courts may have sentenced those involved. And Microsoft may have patched the holes that once let Xbox prototypes slip through the cracks. But the story doesn't really end there. Because what these teenagers did, From Minecraft scams to multi-million-dollar frauds, from stolen game codes to hijacked Twitter accounts, was more than just crime. It was a glimpse into a new era. An era where the borders of the digital world are thin, where the difference between a billion-dollar company and a clever kid in his bedroom might be nothing more than a phone call, a stolen password, or a moment of carelessness. Some of the kids who took part in these hacks rebuilt their lives, finding careers in cybersecurity, using the same skills they once abused to defend instead of attack. Others slipped into darker places: isolation, depression, addiction, or prison sentences that scarred them for years. A few vanished completely, ghosts of a digital age that moved on without them. And yet, their story remains one of the most striking warnings of our time. That power online does not always belong to governments, corporations, or billionaires. Sometimes it can belong to kids who learn how to bend the rules, who saw opportunity where others saw walls, who turned games into gateways and scams into headlines. But with that power came consequences. Ruined lives, destroyed trust, broken families, and legacies that will always follow them, not just in court documents, but in the cautionary tales told to the next generation of hackers. The internet doesn't forget, and the world is still asking, what will the next big hack look like? Who will be bold enough or reckless enough to make the same mistakes? Studio microphone closing call to action. And now, I want to hear from you. Do you think these teenagers were simply criminals? Or were they geniuses who got lost chasing the wrong dream? Were they victims of their own youth? Or proof that power in the digital world has no age? Backend Index pointing right, drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'll be reading every single one. And if you found this story as shocking and fascinating as we did, make sure to subscribe to our channel, Zimo Voice, so you don't miss the next deep dive into the hidden stories of the digital age. Because this isn't the end. This is just one chapter in a game of cat and mouse that never truly ends.